Hello and welcome to the Salty Club podcast. I'm your host, Caitlin Creeper, and I am here today with Alex Scott. Alex is a narcissistic abuse healing coach. Alex, welcome to the show. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm super happy to be here. It's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah, I think so. Let's start with, how did you become a narcissistic abuse healing coach? How did it begin?
Yeah. What a loaded question. I'll keep it short and brief, but basically, in my early 20s, I kept finding myself repeating really unhealthy relationship patterns. I was dating a lot of, man after man who was taking advantage of me and using my words against me, using past pains against me. And eventually I actually started asking really hard questions to my most toxic partner ever. And as I started asking questions, I started taking what I was kind of seeing and observing in this person to Google. And I was like, what does it mean when someone does this? What is, this tactic? And I started to learn, this is abuse. These are there's things like gaslighting and triangulation, which I had no vocabulary for. But as I started looking these things up, I was learning. And so I finally just sat him down and was like, I had known at that point in our relationship that he had been to court-ordered therapy previously for, it's a long story, but for some physical violence that had taken place in a club. And I was like, when you were in court-ordered therapy, did a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder or narcissism come up? And he actually was honest, which is I look back in that moment and I'm shocked that he actually admitted to me that, yes, he was diagnosed, NPD with borderline traits to be exact. And because they usually don't admit things like that. And so when I realized that, I started just to plot my escape, and if you've been through an abusive relationship or even just someone who's trending severely narcissistic, maybe they aren't even diagnosed, that's something that's going to resonate with people because it's not a breakup hey, really enjoyed our time together, and I just think it's time for us to go our separate ways. Wish you all the best. That conversation doesn't happen. It's quite literally a chess match where you need to think ahead and plot your moves in a calculated way to be able to exit in such a safe manner, right? So I got to work on doing that and stuck to it. And then as I started healing from that relationship and learning more about narcissism and how to avoid repeating those patterns, I realized I had a narcissistic parent. And when I went to my half sister, she's 9 years older than me, has a very different relationship with this parent. They actually agreed. They were like, yep, that's exactly right. This is how this person operates. And, again, our experience had been different. My half sister is a little bit more of the golden child in the narcissistic parent dynamic, and I'm the scapegoat. But if you have a narcissistic parent, and this was very much true of our relationship with them, that it swapped depending on who was, being the better version of the child that the narcissistic parent wanted to push the other one to conform to, right? So it changed depending on the narc parent's agenda. But that was something that, as I started to realize, I was like, oh my God, I need to take this healing work seriously if I really want to get out of the cycle I see and live a life where I'm in alignment with who I actually am. And I feel calm. That was the other thing. My baseline was anxiety. So, how can I find a life and create a life for me where I am having healthy relationships, where I am supported, where I am feeling at peace within my body, and I can tap into my intuitive self. So that's the cliff notes of how I came, 7+ years later, here I am teaching others to have the same transformation.
That's incredible because it's a very hard world to work in. And having those kinds of words that you have are just life-changing. That word, gaslighting, when I was in an abusive relationship, all I know is that I was being made to feel crazy, but I didn't know that word yet. So there's something about reading that, oh no, this is intentionally happening to me, that I can't trust my own version of reality. There is just something so strong about having that language to use, because before that, what do you have? Or you can't even trust your own judgment because that's being completely warped.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, abuse is such a scary word, and there's a lack of education on what abuse is, what trauma is. Typically when we hear big scary words like that, our minds go to acute events, like, trigger warning here for anyone, so let's all take a deep breath together, but things like rape and mugging and shootings and things of that nature, which, they happen way too often to begin with. And that's, yes, very much abuse. That's very much traumatic. And there's also these things called little t traumas, and abuse that's verbal and emotional and mental. The science shows it's just as damaging for the physical abusive aspects or dynamics as well. So, there's a lot of survivors of narcissistic abuse that are scared to own the fact that I am a abuse survivor. I have been traumatized. I have been through something like this, because there's this idea that if we claim that, narcissism is abusive, or that I have been abused, we feel like we're taking the spotlight away from people who have had more intense, versions of abuse and trauma. And I want to say that it all sucks. It all sucks. It's all bad. It's all traumatic. It all leaves wounds that, if left unresolved, really can cause us to have self-sabotaging behaviors, and also really experience a life that is not what we want. Like it's not, it's not peaceful. It's not abundant. It's not, it feels very glass half empty, instead of half full. And, for anyone out there that's listening to this, I just want to say, when we can own, like, this is abuse, this person was narcissistic, the second we start to get there, we start to make progress, because now we're not working against ourselves, right? So I just want to name that, because I think that a lot of people feel like unworthy of even identifying as an abuse survivor, and it's like, you are, babes. Like we gotta understand that labeling what we've been through as abuse, or that we have trauma, doesn't take away from others who have had it worse. And simultaneously, it actually allows you to move through and take the healing work seriously to the level that you really need to, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think there's that other level of shame, because there's such a misconception
Yeah.
about the kind of woman who ends up in an abusive relationship, that
So
she's
true.
not educated, that she's insecure, that I can just lift off so many things. So many
True.
women who find themselves in this position are like, how did this happen to me? And I think,
Yeah.
what can you speak to that misconception about the kind of woman that gets into these kinds of relationships?
Thank you for saying that. I just want to say, because it's so true, and this is such a good question. And you would be surprised. Like, I feel like you're the first person who has ever asked me this question, so thank you. We need to understand this is really perverted, in the sense that narcissistic people, especially, go after people that they admire, people that have something that they don't have, whether it's confidence, whether it's joy, whether it's a CEO title, whether it's, a humanitarian type, like they have this service heart, right? This service-based heart. And the reason narcissistic people go after folks that have something they can't have is, I kind of like the analogy there's a few analogies I use to describe narcissists, but one of them is the vampire type archetype, where they quite literally suck the energy and joy and confidence and all of that out of the people that they choose to prey on and eventually get into relationship with, and then, utilize all of those aspects of themselves for the narcissist, right? And so, we need to understand that, first of all, I want to just shout from the rooftops that there is a lack of education on what narcissism is. And unfortunately, especially in the case of America, but globally, a lot of narcissistic tactics and abusive behaviors have been normalized by societies. So, one, let's just wave a big red flag and say, like, yes, the system is broken. There is a lack of education. And yes, a lot of these women and people who have been through these relationships don't know what they don't know. It's not their fault. Two, the
Mhm.
fact that these women who are so successful in all aspects of their life, but for some reason in relationships just happen to keep choosing toxic partnerships, it's not because, the woman is uneducated or silly or a lack of like, yes, the insecurity thing can come to fruition in certain ways, like, we talk about past conditioning and things of that nature, but it's less of that and it's way more when you don't know what narcissism is, you don't know what narcissism is. And a lot of these women that are so successful, they have it, they're, for lack of a better way to put it, they have their shit together and they choose to love people because they have big hearts. And so they choose to give the benefit of the doubt. And all of these things, it's not a negative thing. It's just there's again this not misunderstanding of, my heart and choosing to love this person isn't the problem. It's how I'm qualifying these partners and vetting them to choose intentionally that they deserve that kind of love from me. Right.
Mhm.
So I hope that helps. Like, yes, lack of education, but two, the narcissist is preying on people in a calculative manner to take, from them what they don't have within themselves. And the women who fall prey to these relationships love to love. And so of course they're happy to give that support, right? Or the
Mhm.
confidence or the reassurance or whatever it is that the narcissist is trying to take from them over and over and over again. And it's not until they kind of hit a rock bottom that they realize like, oh my God, who am I now? Like, I feel like a
Yeah.
shell of myself, you know?
Yep.
So yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah. Thank you so much for breaking that down. And it's so true. Something I see specifically in my corner of the world because I've lived in tourist spots since I was 22. So almost
Mm.
10 years now. And I know it because I went through it myself. I came and I was traveling and I was really open to the world. And that's when I fell into this kind of relationship. And when I came, I was so myself, right? As much as you can be when you're 22, you're still figuring out a lot of stuff. But I remember I was just like so open to the world and I wanted to have an experience and I wanted to taste life. And I had so much like fire. And then someone I met around that time, I remember I saw them again when I was about a year and a half into the relationship. And then I saw her again a few years out of the relationship. And she said, when I saw you in that relationship, that second time, it was like you had no personality, nothing. And she was like, it was
Mm.
so strange talking to you because there was just nothing there. And it's just so interesting because unfortunately what I see a lot is these women who have so much to give and so much love and they want to eat the world whole and that's why they're going through these places. But the downside of that is maybe they don't have their usual support system. And because you're in a different culture, you do have to be open to like, okay, maybe things are different. Maybe so that kind of does open to questioning your own version of reality too. And it's something that I
Totally.
unfortunately see over and over is many girls getting like, for lack of a better, I see so many beautiful relationships. I'm in one now with a guy from Guatemala and we have a beautiful baby. And
Oh,
I see
congrats.
that a lot too. Thank you. But I also see, because I've seen it in myself, a lot of women who travel to these places do get stuck in these relationships and they can't get out because they don't have their usual support system, their usual culture, their usual framework. And I've seen some really sad stories about that. And the other side of that is because coming to these places can be painted as this paradise, right? Because you're going to these tropical places on the beaches, you met a
Yeah.
foreigner or you met someone overseas, and it's almost like this fantasy gets created that it's almost embarrassing to then come home with your tail between your legs and be like, oh yeah, that I ended up in a really scary situation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. I will say, like, when we look at larger touristy type cities, like very well-known travel destinations, in America, LA, New York, right? But Chicago. When we look at these larger cities, there is a trend, and I'm not going to say like narcissists only thrive in these big touristy, that's not what I'm saying, but there is a correlation where there are more narcissistic people in these big, because it's a status thing, right? So, something to be aware of. And like the other thing, I actually was talking about this on my podcast this week, is that I'm a big, and this might offend some people, and we can talk about this more if you want to dig into it, but this is huge. It's like, I really want to get away from narcissistic behaviors being enabled by this excuse of culture. right? Like gaslighting shouldn't be okay no matter where you come from or how you were raised, right? Triangulation shouldn't be okay no matter where you come from or how you were raised, right? And so a lot of times there like you said, there's these cultures that can kind of normalize these behaviors, and that doesn't make it okay. That doesn't make it conducive for a healthy relationship ever, right? And so, I will say that once you start to learn the tactics that narcissistic types utilize and you can spot them in real time, no matter where you are in the world, it becomes a superpower, because it's, verbal, mental, emotional abuse is abuse, no matter where it is or how it's wrapped up to be, right? So, I really want to shout that from the rooftops as well, and just make it very clear, like, saying, well, because of the culture, I'm going to let it slide. And it's like, we got to be way more. And there are some things absolutely that might, on the surface, sure, be excusable. But when it really comes down to, I'm calling somebody crazy, when I am pushing you up against and comparing you to my ex-partner to shame you into doing something for me, no. No.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, because it's true. And I think that's a reason why it's not spoken a lot, because you don't want to be seen as the person who comes and starts criticizing another culture. But we are a global society. We do travel, we do meet people, we do have a society. So there does have to be like a global, we can't just let things slide because they're from a different country.
No,
Yeah.
basic human decency, respect, kindness. Shouldn't that be a global principle that we all aim to be, right? Like it's not exclusive to race. It's not exclusive to culture. Respect is respect. Kindness is kindness.
Yeah, totally. And like, let's use like the word culture properly. Yes, we want to carry down beautiful traditions like the dress and the music and the this and the that, and like the community aspect. Yes. So yes, for sure, parts of culture, but not everything has to be preserved as culture, especially things that are so harmful. And why would you want to preserve these things? And I know we watch how our parents relate, and often that can affect like how we date later in life, but we also have the choice to change how we relate to our partners, what we accept for ourselves, and then what our kids and what like the children watch us doing. And that's that's part of it, right?
Always. Yeah, exactly. Totally.
The other thing I want to talk about is, and this was something I got a lot, I think you must hear this a lot too, when friends think they're helping friends get out of a situation like this, one big thing they say is, why don't you just leave? Like, it's that simple. And as we know from studies, the average person can try to leave about 7 times before they're actually successful, if they leave at all. Why do you think it's so hard to understand how like intertwined it actually is, and why it's so hard to leave? What would you like more people to understand about why it is so difficult to leave?
It's so layered. It's so deeply layered. I need to take a big breath just because my heart hurts like hearing this question. And like my heart goes out to the people who have been told that, because it's such an it feels so invalidating in the moment to hear that. So for all of you out there, like, one, we need to understand our friends and family members who say things like that to us, they don't know. They don't know. They don't know. And much like maybe you yourself, before you got into this relationship, may not have known, right? There's someone the other day who was like, I used to think the term narcissism was overused until I dated a narcissistic person, and now I get it. And, sometimes like that's the way that people learn and realize. But, going back to what I said before, it isn't as simple as leaving like any other relationship, right? The whole reason it's abusive is because of the amount of fear and shame that the narcissistic person has injected into the survivor of the abuse, that by the time the survivor of the abuse, 1, realizes they're being abused, and 2, wants to start to make strides to leave, they're in it so deep that it's not as easy as just being like I said before, this isn't working out, wish you all the best, bye, right? Like, you have to be calculated for a few reasons. 1, safety, right? Like, when we try and have a conversation with someone who is trending narcissistically abusive, two things will happen. One, they will either go straight into manipulating, like love bombing, manipulating, but don't you love me? But I promise I'll go to therapy. I promise, like, let me get through this rough patch and I'll treat you better. Like, they will say everything that they want to say and make all the promises that you want to hear, really, to try and hook you back in. So that can happen. And sometimes version B is they might just go straight into the narcissistic rage, right? How dare you, after everything I've done for you, and you are going to do this, that, and the other thing after blah, 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 blah. And if you really loved me, that's not love, like da, 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 da. They're going to say all these really awful things. And version C is they start with the love bombing. Let me tell you what you want to hear. And when they realize that's not working, then they go into the narcissistic rage. So those are the 3 tracks that it'll take. And really, no matter which track it takes, the one thing that will always happen to the survivor of the abusive situation is they will feel more pain and more shame in leaving. And because of the gaslighting that the narcissist will inject throughout those tactics, they're now feeling, am I the crazy one? Am I really the problem? Maybe they're right. Like, I don't really love them if I'm willing to leave, like blah, 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 like all these different, like we call it cognitive dissonance, when your brain's kind of trying to rationalize 2 different realities coexisting at once. And so, we need to understand that, like, the other aspect that's really important to think about is the physical violence side of things. Sometimes it's one of those things where the narcissist will threaten, but never make good on it. Sometimes they do. And so we need to make space for, we again can't just simply walk out, have a conversation and leave, because we need to think about, will this person act on these threats? Because we need to always, always, always put our safety first. And so for anyone that's hearing this and you might be on your way out or trying to figure a way out and you have had threats, I want to tell everyone, like, I would rather you have the most intense safety exit strategy that's like you're taking extra precaution and you don't need to utilize it, like all those resources, versus someone who's like, let me cross my fingers and I don't really want to call the authorities, or I don't really want to take the time to think of a safe exit strategy. I kind of just want to rip the Band-Aid off and like figure it out. Like, and then you're wishing you had, right? Like something happens where you're like, I wish I did call the authorities. I wish I did take the time to be overly precautious, right? So it's like always err on the side of taking extra precaution, because we need to, again, we want to leave in the safest way possible while avoiding as much abuse as possible. And then when we get into the whole layers of like marriage and children, right? If that's the case for many, then the process is slower. The narcissist is going to want to make it as challenging as possible for you, because that's their motto. When they make things more challenging for you, they get a rise out of it, right? And so, it's again, for those of you who may have caught yourself saying that to someone, I hope, like, one, maybe this podcast is super educational. Our conversation that we're going to be having on Sunday is super educational. But like, we need to understand it's not the same. And so unless you have been through it yourself and you have resources to give, I really encourage those of you who might not understand what your friend has been through is to get curious and ask questions. And 90% of the time, I really want to say this, abuse survivors tell a very watered down version of what they've actually been through. We don't like to give all the nasty details. One, because of the internalized shame we carry. It's like, oh my God, like they're going to hear me tell them that this person did this to me. And then they're really going to question why I went back to them. Right. So, please just hear that and understand that a lot of the times the version of the story you're hearing is still watered down. It's still not 100% accurate.
That's it. And a lot of the time throughout the relationship, even if your friends notice if something's wrong, you're trying to convince them it's fine because you're still wanting that version of reality yourself. So it can be like, oh, wait, you were saying all these positive things about them. And it's like, yeah, but that was covering the reality. And it's so true. And because this is actually the first time I've really opened up about it on a podcast, it is something I like to stay separated from a bit because it's true. And then it is something that when I speak about it, it's just almost as as theoretical as possible, because it is hard to be inside your story and talk about exactly what happened. And
Totally.
also at the same time, not everyone is owed your story. You know, I did have people being like, I'm not sure. And it's like, well, I don't owe you my story to prove it happened. And I think that can happen too, this situation where it's almost like you have to prove that happened. And I think that also
Yeah.
contributes to people being like, I'm just not going to
No.
talk about it. Hmm.
Totally. Yeah. And for me, and I know this is definitely true of a lot, and maybe you'll like kind of relate to this. It's like after the first, 10 times I tried to leave, I stopped telling my friends I went back. I just like lived a double life because I was too shameful to admit to them that I was seeing this person again after, like you said, sharing all of the awful things they'd put me through. So I got to a point where I was just like, like almost like a double agent, but not in the cool way. Like, living this really awful relationship and like trying to, love him into a better way of being, right? Because that's what all of us
Yeah.
say. Like, if I give you more love, if I give you more grace, if you just see how willing I am to make this work, maybe you'll finally, start treating me like a human. And I would go to work and my friends would be like, how are you? How are you doing since the breakup? And I'm like, I'm fine. Like,
All
little do you
good.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm going over there tonight. Shh, don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I get it. I lived with my ex, and I remember again after like a few times I left, I stopped telling people. But I had one friend, and she was a little bit older, so maybe she'd kind of had a bit more experience, and she just said, "Look, I've got a spare room for you whenever you need." And every time I
Mhm.
would go there, I'd be like, "Okay, I'm going back," and she's like, "Yep, okay." And it turned out to be the best thing because there was no shame around it. And then every time I went back, she said, "Okay, my house is still open for you." Like, okay. And she was just like, I know you love him and it's okay to love him. That's okay. And it was just this amount of grace that I wasn't getting from anywhere else, because I feel like my other community didn't understand, and it was just like, this has to be met with, what are you doing? This is so stupid. But someone to be like, yeah, you can love him, but also you can love him and end the relationship too. That's something you can
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. And I think that's really what we all need. It's not what we don't want to be enabled to the point to where it's like, we don't have any friends being like, hey, babe, I'm concerned about you. Right.
Yeah.
So we don't want to go down that trajectory, but we definitely don't want to go down the you're so dumb, why don't you just leave like type of conversation, because it's like, it's exactly what you said. When we are shamed into making like, from the decisions that we make, it causes us to want to hide and go, I call it going internal even more. Like we recluse, like we pull away from people, because if that's the response we're always getting, why do you think I'm going to feel safe coming to you being like, oh my God, I need support or I need help or whatever? Like, you're not, right? So we need to kind of marry the two, where we aren't shaming someone, we are coming at them from a place of concern, curiosity, and compassion, right? And it's like, this is a safe space. I am here for you when you need me. I also want you to know I love you and I think the world of you, and you deserve so much more. And so I'm really curious to know, like, what keeps you going back? Like, what's on your heart? What's on your mind? What do you think is going to continue to happen if you do decide to go back? Like, ask questions. They will figure it out.
Mm,
Like, but they need to figure it out on their own, because the reality is, like, there's nothing anyone on the outside looking in can really say or do to get them to like find that courage to leave. It truly needs to come from within themselves, And
yeah.
so we can be their cheerleaders, right? And like you said, we lovingly support them without shame and provide a safe space. But that's really it. That's all you can do as a bystander.
Totally. Thank you so much for that. And that's true, because how often do we not ask questions or even think to ask questions, because we have a fixed idea of, no, they need to do this and they'll be okay. But just, yeah, talk to me, tell me. And the other thing is talking badly about the partner. We think if we talk badly about the partner, like, they're a fucking asshole, who would do this? Well, your friend loves this person. So why would that help?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Yeah. I think a lot of times too, like people get so hyper fixated on the narcissist and like trying to diagnose them, or excuse me, not diagnose them. And they get into this, like, again, this hyper fixation of like, are they really narcissistic or are they just having a bad day? And it's like, we need to get away from the narcissist and what they are or are not doing, and pay way more attention to like, okay, so this is the third time that they've treated me in XYZ manner. So like for me, my ex-narcissist discard was cheating. So, and it happened about every 2 weeks. And that's a really
Wow.
lot. That's a lot of cheating when
Yeah.
you sit down and think about how often, like how long I was with this person and how often it occurred. And so, when I got to a point where it was like, okay, this person keeps cheating on me. Every time they finish cheating on me, they come back and say this. What causes me to believe them this time? And I like when we can really start to get into like, okay, they're saying this and this is how I'm responding. What is it within me that has me going back to them? And again, having an abundance of love and grace and forgiveness to give is not the problem here. It's what within us is allowing us to give that to someone who is committed to not reciprocating it. You see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
that's the little switch. It's so subtle, but the second that we can switch that and start to realize like, okay, wait, this is how I'm contributing to this. And like, because I can control how I show up and I can control how the decisions I make, what decision do I want to make that's different this time? Right? Like instead of going back in this way, how can I choose to not go back? Right? Or instead of allowing the narcissist to do X, Y, or Z, this is how I'm going to speak up for myself this go around. Right. So just a little something to chew on for sure.
Yeah. Is there such a thing of over-diagnosing everyone as a narcissist, or is that just something people say to push back? What do you think about that whole thing?
Oh my gosh, love this question too. I think it's a little bit of both. I think that there are people out there who are quick to label. Like for example, gaslighting, when we define it like Webster's dictionary, it's like, denying someone's reality. Okay, cool. Like very surface level when we look at it. And so sometimes people will be in conversation, and if their friends like, but that's not what happened, they're like, you're gaslighting me, you're a narcissist, right? No. Gaslighting is a two-hit wonder, and it's way more than just denying someone's reality. It's also a character attack. So like a narcissistic gaslighting pattern is going to sound like, that's not what happened, you're crazy. That's not what happened, you're making things up again, right? There's a character attack after the first what we would say is the textbook gaslighting, right? And so the reason I think a lot of people are, I think some people are quick to label narcissism out of their own defense. They're like maybe they've been through that in the past. And so now as like a self-protection mechanism, they like anyone who has the slightest sign of narcissism, they're like, stay away, right? That could definitely be a part of it. I think another thing is just a lack of education, because yes, there's a ton, like you said, there's so much content out there on what narcissism is, but we need to understand that narcissism is a spectrum, that narcissism, in my opinion, especially after the amount of work I've done in this industry, is way more common than what statistics show, because that statistic is built off of people who get their butts into a psychiatrist's office and actually get diagnosed, which is very rare for someone who's truly NPD, like diagnosable, to do, right? Because in order for that to happen, this is actually kind of a frustrating reality, but for any kind of disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, even things like ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, for any disorder to be diagnosed, the person needs to admit it's causing disorder in my life, right? Like I can't go and say, this person does XYZ. Are they a narcissist? Can you diagnose him? No, the person with the narcissistic characteristics needs to go into an office and be like, yo, this is what it's doing to me. Help me solve the problem. And then they can be diagnosed. Also doesn't happen, right? I think that there's a little bit of that. But I really think that what we're seeing is like, we're calling bullshit. It's like such a silly way to put it, but it's so true. I truly believe that, and I've seen it, there's so many, and like we said before, even with the culture, political type side of things too, it's like, there have been so many narcissistic behaviors and tendencies that have been normalized that people cling to. And so although they might not be truly narcissistic in the fact that they are, the NPD, the disorder itself is a inner vow basically to avoid shame, right? So that's why the narcissist uses all the tactics they use is they refuse to take accountability or apologize, because if they do, that means that they're feeling shame, right? And that is a feeling they refuse to feel. So, what we're really seeing here is as we become more and more educated on what narcissism is, we're seeing a few people stand behind like, well, this is how I was raised and I turned out okay, so be it. And they're going to stay stuck out of, again, a defense mechanism pattern. And then there truly are people who are narcissistic and the whistle's being blown and they're not happy about it. And so they're going to say that word is overused and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's not though. You just don't want to be, again, you don't want to be held accountable. So you're avoiding that kind of content and education being spread,
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I wanted to ask, because this is heavy work, right? And you support a lot of people going through these experiences or who have left these experiences, but your space, like your page, is a bright, positive space. And I can just tell from you that you're a bright, positive, energetic person. But how do you stay in this work and have it as your career without getting kind of dragged backwards?
Ooh, girl, you're asking so many good questions. On the surface level, I'm going to say something so kitschy, but it's true. I practice what I preach, like this work that I did to, using the resources and the education I have to unwind my own trauma. It's not just like I checked the box and like now my triggers that I used to have when I was still in the depths of my trauma no longer exist. I'm done. I never need to revisit it again. That is not my motto. Like me as a practitioner, like I am a lifelong healer. I'm a lifelong learner. And I am a lifelong evolver, like I really believe like as a species, we are meant to be here to grow, evolve. And I also believe we're souls having a human experience for whatever reason to be enlightened or, I don't know, reincarnated as something else. Like, I do. This is where I get a little spiritual woo woo, but the way I stay grounded is by regulating my nervous system every day, is by, taking the time to feel my own feelings. Like last Tuesday, I had a really heavy session with a gal on, something she's working through with a parent figure. And after that session, I needed to process my own stuff, because as I was holding space for her to process, I also started having some feelings come up for me. And so it's like, instead of, this idea where like we tell ourselves, I don't have the time to do that, or I don't, it's going to take too long if I sit down to feel my feelings right now. We tell ourselves these stories that we don't have time or it'll take too long. But actually, when we stay in the work and we really embrace these tools, it can happen so efficiently. And so I as kitschy and surface level as it might say, by the way I stay grounded and the way I stay positive is by doing the things that I teach. Like it's the truth. I regulate my nervous system every day. I take time to literally listen. I was listening to the birds chirp this morning and I'm just like, hi birdies. Like, like we're all, it feels kind of like Snow Whitey in a way, but like, no, those are the things that really churn me being grounded and me being able to remain positive and thankful for this work, despite, yes, conversations being heavy. And there's also a part of me that gets angry, like because of the mental health space, I think is really broken. And so there's a part of me that's like, I someday, like my big scary goal is like, someday I really want to have an impact on transforming the way that mental health is set up, especially in America. Like it should be a God-given right for you to have access to free mental health services. It kills me that, I make my program so cost effective where like I used to charge way more money. I've slashed my prices because I want to help more people. And it kills me that it's like, spending $3 a day for someone is too expensive for mental health. That kills me. Like it shouldn't be that way. And so, I really someday hope that I have some kind of impact on like, what can we do? Because the other thing, sorry, I'm answering this question super long, but
no, I love it. Keep going.
I really believe that mental health, if we can get globally, we can resolve trauma if we can enter inner peace, right? And like have grounded, less triggered people in power, so many wonderful things can happen. I really believe that mental health is the answer to like everything. Everything, you know? So
Mhm.
I am really passionate about it, but that's how I stay focused and positive and don't let it get to me, is just by doing the work, continuing to do the work no matter what.
Thank you so much for that. And also thank you for stating that's it. It doesn't end. And even if you get into a new relationship, this is something I'm sure you see a lot, is maybe people get into a healthy relationship, but by that point they're hyper defensive or hyper cautious or like very hyper vigilant. That must be something you see a bit. Can you speak to that?
Totally. Yeah, this was me too. This was actually one of the reasons why I started my business, was because of that. It's like I was unwinding my trauma from my past. But then as I started a wonderful, healthy relationship a few years ago, since then we've gone our separate ways, but still it was my first long-term, like beautiful, healthy relationship. And in the beginning of that, I was triggered left, right, and center. I was suspicious. I was anxious. And so a lot of people start to ask, they're like, I am in a new relationship with a wonderful person, yet I'm still like on edge. What's going on? And it's because the healing work is still happening. And really this sounds so science jargony, but it's the nervous system, right? Your nervous system, there's a great analogy for this that I'll talk about to really paint the picture in a minute. But your nervous system is what is supposed to keep you alive, right? Like if you touch a hot stove, before your brain realizes you touched a hot stove, your hand is already moved. Why? Because your nervous system picks up on that stimulus. Ow, that's hot. If you had to wait for your brain to be like, ouch, you would already have 3-degree burns, right?
Yeah.
So the way that I kind of paint this picture is like looking at a dog who's been rescued from an abusive environment, right? Like this dog, it deserves all the love in the world, but when it leaves an abusive environment and enters a new home, even with, caregivers and I was going to say masters, owners who love this dog and want to supply this dog with all the toys and treats and amazing food and wonderfulness that they want to give it, right? The dog doesn't know that the owners aren't abusive yet, right?
Mm.
So how does the dog respond? It's going to be skittish. It's going to be standoffish. When you go to pet it, it might nip at you. It might growl, right? And so does that mean that the dog is all hope is lost? No, it just means that over time, when the dog learns that the new environment is safe and its nervous system can calm down and that, it has an experience where the dog can be pet instead of beaten, then it starts to learn like, you're safe. I'm safe with you. I love you. We're good. Right. And so we as a species quite literally are no different. Your nervous system has been conditioned to be hypervigilant, to be on the lookout for, are you about to gaslight me? Are you about to blame? Are you going to triangulate me? What's going on? Are you cheating on me? Who's on your phone? Like, there's all this suspicion, paranoia, hypervigilance that comes up, this anxiety baseline. And it's because your nervous system is trying to protect you from your new partner. Now, here's the thing. You can do option A, which is you stay in that relationship and you just like out of pure determination over time, like the dog, you learn like, okay, you're not going to gaslight me. I can set a boundary with you and I know I'm not going to be screamed at, right? Or you can make it efficient. And this is where the nervous system regulation comes in. And when you regulate your nervous system every day, I've had clients who I have a 3-day boot camp on this. It's about 3 hours long in total time, all about tracking your triggers, understanding your nervous system and regulating your nervous system. And I have people who take that program and they reach out, and just after the 3 days of it, they're like, I'm so calm. I'm surprised at how well this works. I'm off my Xanax, like all of this wild stuff but because we're designed to efficiently process emotions. We are. Back in the day with cavemen era, go on me in our little DeLorean as we go back in time, right? Like when we were cavemen and women, we would hear a branch, break in the forest and we'd be hyper vigilant. Like, oh my God, is that a predator? Right? And then when we would assess the situation, we would either realize, fight, flight response needs to come on, and I need to either get the heck out or fight this bear that's trying to come over to my tribe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or we assess and it's like, oh, it was a bunny hopping in the woods. We're fine and we can calm down, right? But when we
Right.
have unresolved trauma, we stay in the survival state, right? We stay in the fight, flight, freeze, fawn state. So when you can regulate your nervous system, you're quite literally showing and controlling your nervous system to enter its safety mode, right? Which is your rest and digest response. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a little bit of education there for you, but like, seriously, like it doesn't healing, if I was going to say this, the healing steps aren't hard. The healing
Well,
steps aren't hard. It's
mm-hmm.
the committing to doing it when you don't feel like doing it. And it's the uncomfortability of actually feeling your feelings that's hard, right? Those are the two things
Yeah.
that make healing challenging, but it's not the steps. It's the commitment and the feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a big distinction, actually. Because I think
Yeah.
people just think it's just going to be this hard chasm of like despair to go into. And it's like, well, actually, the steps, if you approach it really systematically and don't negotiate with yourself each day,
Yeah.
actually, you'll move through it maybe better than you think you will.
Totally. Yeah. I think like for me, I think that's what really sets me apart from other people in this industry is I'm such a freaking science nerd. Like, and the reason I set my programs up the way I did is because what at my lowest low, I was quite literally like curled up on the floor of my apartment crying, just like, will someone just tell me what I need to do? Like, what do I need to do? Just give me the steps, like write me the recipe because it's so loud. People are like, journal, meditate, do this, do that. And it's like, okay, those are wonderful things, but really at the base of it all is the nervous system work because of exactly what I just described, right? Until we approach the nervous system, there's no amount of journaling, breath work, breath work is regulating, so that doesn't count, but journaling, meditating, right? Reframing your thoughts. There's no amount of that that's going to truly transform your trauma and get rid of it, right? So
Right.
I approach it this way specifically because of who I was and what I craved when I was at my rock bottom. It's like I didn't want to be anxious anymore. I wanted to tap into the difference between anxiety and intuition. I wanted to find inner peace. I wanted to find joy. I wanted to just be able to know, people say this all the time and it used to piss me off. Just listen to your gut. Like when you're with them, listen to your gut. And it's like, what? When your gut has been conditioned to always again from the trauma, when your gut has been conditioned from the trauma in your past to always be suspicious and hypervigilant after what you went through, there's no amount of listening to your gut that's going to make sense to you when you're
Yeah, my
meeting
gut
these
is like a
people.
skitty cat right now. Like my gut
Yeah.
can't be listened to at all. It wants to run away.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's like,
Yeah.
how do we heal the relationship in our nervous system so that we can differentiate between anxiety, intuition, and all of those other things like the warning bells or true connection? I like to say bats or butterflies in the tummy. Like, is it a flutter or is it
Mm.
like a get the heck out of here? Right.
Right.
So yeah, sorry. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk, y'all. Went off.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be super helpful to people. And as we start to wrap this up, I just wanted to say, what is one small thing that you'd like to say to maybe a listener who's in an abusive relationship or healing through it? What is one small message you'd just like to give them?
You know, what's coming up for me intuitively right now is the difference between guilt and empathy. So I'm going to share that. I speak to people every day who tell me, I feel guilty for cutting them out. I feel guilty for leaving them. And the narcissist has purposefully gotten you to a point to where you hold on to that, because the more guilt you feel, the more responsible you feel for them, right? The less
Yeah.
likely you are to leave. And so if that's you, maybe you're trying to leave, but this sense of guilt has you going back, right? Or maybe you have left, but there's a part of you feeling guilty that, might feel tempted to reach out or reconnect. I want you to know that that guilt is there by design. And that when you can recognize that it's actually not guilt, what you're really feeling, babes, is empathy. And here's what I mean by that. Guilt is this very black and white. You either did something wrong or you didn't, right? If you were in a court of law and you said, I sped down, I went 20 miles an hour over the speed limit. That's something that's like, okay, you did the thing. That's guilt, right? And now you can take that healthy guilt to say, I'm going to do better next time. I'm not going to speed. that's not really what survivors of narcissistic abuse are feeling. What they're actually feeling is empathy, because 99% of the time it's empathy disguised as guilt, in the sense that you feel and you know that the narcissist is going to be upset, that they're going to be angry, that they're going to be sad. And because of that, you're feeling guilty for causing those emotions in that other person. But it's understandable that you're going to have an empathetic response because you actually give a damn about how you impact people, right? And the
Yeah.
narcissist has pushed and pushed and pushed to cause you to take over responsibility for their emotions so that you would conform to being who the narcissist wanted you to be. So I share that to say, don't let this guilt/empathy keep you stuck going back to the narcissist, because it's all a tactic. And when you can see it as a tactic, and when you can recognize the feelings your feelings have been projected onto you by design to keep you coming back, I really feel that that last little piece, it allows you to fully detach and start to disconnect when you're like, I'm feeling this way because they want me to. They have set the chess pieces up to make me feel this way so that they can still continue to get out of me what they want from me. When you see it that way, it allows for you to kind of come up for a breath of air and say, okay, I can feel this way and I can still choose to not go back. I can feel this way and still recognize this person has proven to me by the pattern of their behavior that they're not for me, right? So that's what came up for me. Whoever that was for, I hope that made you feel seen and understood. Yeah. And just stick to your guns. You are so worthy. Like, everyone on this planet is so worthy of love and so worthy of peace, like true peace. You owe it to yourself to stick to your guns and just focus on you, because the life you're about to create for yourself, narc free, is going to be amazing. I can tell you that much.
Alex, Scott, thank you so much for this chat today. It was really special. Thank you for giving us your time. And for anyone who wants to learn more, we'll be continuing this on Sunday. So what can people expect to learn at the workshop on Sunday? Where will we go?
Totally. I plan to talk a little bit more about the emotional addiction aspect and some of the other, like, science of why these relationships can feel so addicting and why we go back to them so often, because there's a lot of science there, as well as some of the other, like, brain phenomena that tend to happen when leaving a narcissistic relationship that people will interpret as signs or things like that. So I'm going to go a little bit more into the psychoeducation of, like, why are they really toxic relationships? Why do we go back to them even when we can logically recognize, like, it's not healthy? And I also want to, like, equip some of the folks that show up with us to, like, with some tools. So I do want to talk about, like, give you a little bit of how can you regulate your nervous system? How can you really set yourself up for success moving forward in your healing journey as you travel the world and, like, really cultivate a life that you thrive in? Like, what are some of the life-changing tools that you can implement into your day-to-day life that set you up not only for a wonderful relationship with yourself, but also to attract a healthy partner that loves you for who you are and isn't on the narcissism spectrum at all. So that's mostly what we're going to be going into on Sunday.
This workshop with Alex Scott is going to be hosted live on the Salty Club on June 25th. So you are more than welcome to join. It will be about an hour and a bit, and we'll go over all of those things that Alex said. And if you use the code THRIVING23 without a G, so THRIVIN 23, you will get $5 off. So it will be $20 for you. And you can find that at watch.thesalty.club. You can check in the show notes for the link as well if you'd like, and we'd love to see you there. If you'd still like to listen in on the replay, it will be available after June 25th, and you can totally just watch in your own time too. Hope to see you there. All right, awesome. And you speak about your nervous system regulation course. Where can people find that?
Yeah, so that's called Hack Your Nervous System. You can definitely find it if you're following me on socials, at the Alex Scott on TikTok or Instagram. You can click the link in bio, go down to self-paced courses and find that there, or you can just slide into a DM. And of course, I'll send you the link, so it'll be in the show notes too. But it's only $33. And like I said, it'll change your life. So definitely worth it.
Awesome. Alex, thank you so much for everything today.
Of course. Yeah. Great conversation. You asked really good questions.